This is PolitiPod's set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023, DC Indictment Edition, with your host, Matt Nisenoff.
Welcome. We told you it would be soon. Here's PolitiPod's set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023, the DC Indictment, American Continued Carnage, the I Alone Can Fix It edition. Once again, we join you with our reading and take on the latest indictment of Donald J. Trump. Honestly, we never left. We'll stop when he stops getting indicted. For this indictment, we have our indictment reader, Erika Klemmt-Ginsberg. I'm your host, Matt Nisenoff, along with fellow Opinionators and Snarkologists, Bickle and GD Fenderson. Erika, we kick it off with you.
In a phone call on December 27th, the defendant spoke with the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general. During the call, the defendant again pressed the unfounded claims regarding State Farm Arena, and the two top Justice Department officials again rebutted the allegations, telling him that the Justice Department had reviewed videotape and interviewed witnesses and had not identified any suspicious conduct.
Trump suggested that they were USC, unidentified suspicious conduct, and blamed the aforementioned mothership.
See how just telling him the truth straightens everything out? Ever since the pivot, everything's been great again.
On December 31st, the defendant signed a verification affirming false election fraud allegations made on his behalf in a lawsuit filed in his name against the Georgia governor. In advance of the filing, co-conspirator 2, who was advising the defendant on the lawsuit, acknowledged in an email that he and the defendant had, since signing a previous verification, been made aware that some of the allegations and evidence proffered by the experts has been inaccurate, and that signing a new affirmation with that knowledge incorporation by reference would not be accurate. The defendant and co-conspirator 2 caused the defendant's signed verification to be filed nonetheless.
It was Trump's last known lie of the year.
Wait, he can write?
On January 2nd, 4 days before Congress's certification proceeding, the defendant and others called Georgia's Secretary of State. During the call, the defendant lied to the Georgia Secretary of State to induce him to alter Georgia's popular vote count and call into question the validity of the Biden electors' votes, which had been transmitted to Congress weeks before, including as follows. The defendant raised allegations regarding the State Farm Arena video and repeatedly disparaged one of the same election workers that co-conspirator 1 had maligned on December 10th. Using her name almost 20 times and falsely referring to her as a professional vote scammer and hustler. In response, the Georgia Secretary of State refuted this. You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that co-conspirator 1 or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context. When the Georgia Secretary of State then offered a link to a video that would disprove co-conspirator 1's claims, the defendant responded, I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a much Georgia Secretary of State. I have a much better link.
They called this link Lucy.
He has a much better link. A link with the Lord.
Lancelot Link.
Lancelot
Link. Secret plot. No.
Lancelot Link. Secret vote.
B. The defendant asked about rumors that paper ballots cast in the election were being destroyed, and the Georgia Secretary of State's counsel explained to him that the claim had been investigated and was not true. C. The defendant claimed that 5,000 dead people voted in Georgia, causing the Georgia Secretary of State to respond, "Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted. And so your information's wrong. That was 2. D. The defendant claimed that thousands of out-of-state voters had cast ballots in Georgia's election, which the Georgia Secretary of State's counsel refuted, explaining, "We've been going through each of those as well. And those numbers that we got, that defendant's counsel was just saying they're not accurate. Everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, but then moved back to Georgia legitimately. They moved back in years ago. This was not like something just before the election."
The question isn't that those people voted after moving back to Georgia. The question is, they moved back to Georgia.
E. In response to multiple other of the defendant's allegations, the Georgia Secretary of State's counsel told the defendant that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation was examining all such claim and finding no merit to them. F. The defendant said that he needed to find 11,780 votes and insinuated that the Georgia Secretary of State and his counsel could be subject to criminal prosecution if they failed to find election fraud as he demanded, stating, "And you are going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal, you know. That's a criminal offense. And you know you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and the Georgia Secretary of State counsels, your lawyer."
Trump has 11,780 problems, but none of them are a ballot.
The next day, on January 3rd, the defendant falsely claimed that the Georgia Secretary of State had not addressed the defendant's allegations, publicly stating that the Georgia Secretary of State was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as the ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. On January 6th, the defendant publicly repeated the knowingly false insinuation that more than 10,300 dead people had voted in Georgia.
Trump got a new number a day calendar, and he was going to keep reporting 10,300 until he learned a new number.
Ruh-roh.
Michigan. On November 5th, 2020, the defendant claimed that there had been a suspicious dump of votes, purportedly illegitimate ballots, stating, "In Detroit, there were hours of unexplained delay in delivering many of the votes for counting. The final batch did not arrive until 4 a.m, and even though the polls closed at 8 o'clock, so they brought it in, and the batches came in, and nobody knew where they came from."
With the lines in predominantly Black precincts being what they were, the last voter probably cast their ballot at 3:45 a.m.
On November 20, 3 days before Michigan's governor signed a certificate of ascertainment notifying the federal government that, based on the popular vote, Biden's electors were to represent Michigan's voters, the defendant held a meeting in the Oval Office with the Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives and the Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate. In the meeting, the defendant raised his false claim, among others, of an illegitimate vote dump in Detroit. In response, the Michigan Senate Majority Leader told the defendant that he had lost Michigan not because of fraud, but because the defendant had underperformed with certain voter populations in the state. Upon leaving their meeting, the Michigan House Speaker and Michigan State Majority Leader issued a statement reiterating this. The Senate and House Oversight Committees are actively engaged in a thorough review of Michigan's elections process, and we have faith in the committee process to provide greater transparency and accountability to our citizens. We have not yet been made aware of any information that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan. And as legislative leaders, we will follow the law and follow the normal process regarding Michigan's electors, just as we have said throughout this election.
In English, we've suppressed the vote as much as the law allows. The rest is on you.
How dare Michiganders be honest? They should be more like elected officials in Ohio.
The Michigan House Speaker, Senate Majority Leader, and Governor all refused to say there was election fraud. Spines? In the Republican Party? Fake news.
On December 1, the defendant raised his Michigan vote dump claim with the Attorney General, who responded that what had occurred in Michigan had been the normal vote counting process and there was no indication of fraud in Detroit.
In English, we've suppressed the vote as much as the law allows. There is no indication of additional fraud. The rest is on you.
Despite this, the next day, the defendant made a knowingly false statement that in Michigan, at 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. That batch was received in horror. No one knows anything about it. It's corrupt. Detroit is corrupt. I have a lot of friends in Detroit. They know it, but Detroit is totally corrupt.
There are too many lies here to address them all, but we can address a lot of friends. Lot and friends are both exaggerations, to say the least.
And the defendant added, and where did all these spiders come from?
On December 4th, co-conspirator 1 sent a text message to the Michigan House Speaker reiterating his unsupported claim of election fraud and attempting to get Michigan House Speaker to assist in reversing the ascertainment of the legitimate Biden electors, stating, "Looks like Georgia may well hold some factual hearings and change the certification under Article Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution." As co-conspirator 2 explained, they just don't have the right to do it, but the obligation. Help me get this done in Michigan.
Georgia is holding a factual hearing, and Giuliani and Trump may be targets. Thank you, Fani Willis.
Similarly, on December 7th, despite still having established no fraud in Michigan, co-conspirator 1 sent a text intended for the Michigan Senate Majority Leader. So I need you to pass a joint resolution from the Michigan legislature that states that the election is in dispute. There's an ongoing investigation by the legislature, and the electors sent by Governor Whitmer are not the official electors of the state of Michigan and do not fall within the safe harbor deadline of December 8th under Michigan law.
Michigan Senate Majority Leader responded, "New phone, who dis?"
And don't forget the part where Shrek doesn't get a chance to kiss Fiona.
On December 14th, the day that the electors in states across the country were required to vote and submit their votes to Congress, the Michigan House Speaker and Michigan Senate Majority Leader announced that, contrary to the defendant's requests, they would not decertify the legitimate election results or electors in Michigan. The Michigan Senate Majority Leader's public statement included, "We have not received evidence of fraud on a scale that would change the outcome of the election in Michigan." The Michigan House Speaker's public statement read, in part, "We've diligently examined these reports of fraud to the best of our ability. I fought hard for President Trump. Nobody wanted him to win more than me. I think he's done an incredible job. But I love our republic too. I can't fathom risking our norms, traditions, and institutions to pass a resolution retroactively changing the electors for Trump simply because some think there may have been enough widespread fraud to give him a win. That's unprecedented for good reason. And that's why there's not enough support in the House to cast a new slate of electors. I fear we'd lose our country forever. This truly would bring mutually assured destruction for every future election in regards to the Electoral College. And I can't stand for that. I won't."
The Michigan House Speaker said, No one wanted Trump to win more than him. I got 6 co-conspirators who would disagree.
But whatever happened to helping a friend?
PolitiPod set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023 with your host, Matt Nisenoff, will return after this brief message.
Hi, I'm Jacob Nisenoff, and I'm one of the people who make PolitiPod, the podcast. Yeah, the political podcast that you haven't listened to yet. We are a group of people who have fun with politics, governance, and more. We alone can save you from making your own political humor podcast. Our writers put together one-liners, sketches, and even a small amount of information on upcoming elections every 2 weeks. You can find out what we have done the last 7 years by going to the soundcloud.com/politipod, or just visit on any Tuesday to see if it's one of the Tuesdays we have a new episode. However you want to do it, feel free to enjoy the laugh and be on your way. Thanks for listening to me. Now go listen to your new political humor podcast of choice, PolitiPod. We're at soundcloud.com/politipod.
And now back to PolitiPod set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023 with your host, Matt Nisenoff.
On January 6, 2021, the defendant publicly repeated his knowingly false claim regarding an illicit dump of more than 100,000 ballots in Detroit.
If only that were the only illicit dump on Detroit.
Like turning on a tap to get water. Oh,
Pennsylvania. On November 11th, 2020, the defendant publicly maligned a Philadelphia city commissioner for stating on the news that there was no evidence of widespread fraud in Philadelphia. As a result, the Philadelphia city commissioner and his family received death threats.
Sorry. In Philly, a death threat is how they say good morning.
if you think Philly folks take sports seriously, watch this.
Public condemnation leading to death threats. I just filled in another spot on my fascist bingo card.
On November 25th, the day after Pennsylvania's governor signed a certificate of ascertainment and thus certified to the federal government that Biden's electors were the legitimate electors for the state, co-conspirator 1 orchestrated an event at a hotel in Gettysburg attended by state legislators. Co-conspirator 1 falsely claimed that Pennsylvania had issued 1.8 million absentee ballots and received 2.5 million in return. In the days thereafter, a campaign staffer wrote internally that co-conspirator 1's allegation was just wrong and there is no way to defend it. The deputy campaign manager responded, "We have been saying this for a while. It's very frustrating."
Giuliani didn't need the governor to defend it, just pretend it.
On December 4th, after 4 Republican leaders of the Pennsylvania legislature issued a public statement that the General Assembly lacked the authority to overturn the popular vote and appoint its own slate of electors, and that doing so would violate the state election code and constitution, the defendant retweeted a post labeling the legislators cowards.
And Trump uninvited them from his fake inauguration in 2021.
Trump passed a note to Becky in third period telling her that he didn't really ever like them and that they would not have been invited to the next sleepover even if Brad said he wanted him there.
I'm just saying, Becky only had her third period because they wouldn't let her terminate.
Wow.
Nice.
On December 31st and January 3rd, the defendant repeatedly raised with the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general the allegation that in Pennsylvania there had been 205,000 more votes than voters. Each time, the Justice Department officials informed the defendant that his claim was false.
Giuliani claimed 1.8 million absentee ballots were sent out and 2.8 million returned. That's 700,000, not 205,000. Even their fake numbers don't add up. His casinos never had a chance.
On January 6, 2021, the defendant publicly repeated his knowingly false claim that there had been 205,000 more votes than voters in Pennsylvania.
Even his made-up voters voted for Biden.
Wisconsin. On November 29th, 2020, a recount in Wisconsin that the defendant's campaign had petitioned and paid for did not change the election result, and in fact, increased the defendant's margin of defeat.
McCarthy wants to impeach Biden for not sending Trump a thank you note.
On December 14, the Wisconsin Supreme Court rejected an election challenge by the campaign. One justice wrote, "Nothing in this case casts any legitimate doubt that the people of Wisconsin lawfully chose Vice President Biden and Senator Harris to be the next leaders of our great country."
However, Trump can be king of the Wisconsin cheese parade.
On December 21st, as a result of the state Supreme Court's decision, the Wisconsin governor, who had signed a certificate of ascertainment on November 30th identifying Biden's electors as the state's legitimate electors, signed a certificate of final determination in which he recognized that the state Supreme Court had resolved a controversy regarding the appointment of Biden's electors and confirmed that Biden had received the highest number of votes in the state and that his electors were the state's legitimate electors.
To paraphrase Willy Wonka, you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Since when in this country's history does getting the most votes mean you win? Oh, right, since forever. Okay, it's Biden then.
That same day, in response to the court's decision that had prompted the Wisconsin governor to sign a certificate of final determination, the defendant issued a tweet repeating his knowingly false claim of election fraud and demanding that the Wisconsin legislature overturn the election results that had led to the ascertainment of Biden's electors as the legitimate elector.
Trump obviously bumped his head on the wall of lies.
Voter fraud again? I'm beginning to see a pattern in Trump's behavior.
On December 27th, the defendant raised with the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general a specific fraud claim that there had been more votes than voters in Wisconsin. The acting deputy attorney general informed the defendant that the claim was false.
Even though the attorney general and the deputy attorney general were both acting, they couldn't act like Trump won just once.
Sad.
On January 6, 2021, the defendant publicly repeated knowingly false claims that there had been tens of thousands of unlawful votes in Wisconsin.
Trump was thinking Wisconsin.
The defendant's use of dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to organize fraudulent slates of electors and cause them to transmit false certificates to Congress. As the defendant's attempts to obstruct the electoral vote through deceit of state officials met with repeated failure, beginning in early December 2020, he and his co-conspirators developed a new plan to marshal individuals who would have served as the defendant's electors had he won the popular vote in 7 targeted states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and cause those individuals to make and send to the vice president and Congress false certifications that they were legitimate electors. Under the plan, the submission of these fraudulent slates would create a fake controversy at the certification proceeding and position the vice president, presiding on January 6th as president of the Senate, to supplant legitimate electors with the defendant's fake electors and certify the defendant as president.
They were also having Mike Pence fitted for a noose, just in case.
Here they are trying to flip 10 more electoral college votes than they'd lost by. The Bush 2000 election really spoiled the Republicans.
The plan capitalized on ideas presented in memoranda drafted by co-conspirator 5, an attorney who was assisting the defendant's campaign with legal efforts related to a recount in Wisconsin. The memoranda evolved over time from a legal strategy to preserve the defendant's rights to a corrupt plan to subvert the federal government function by stopping Biden's electors' votes from being counted and certified, as follows. A. The November 18 Memorandum, Wisconsin Memo, advocated that, because of the ongoing recount in Wisconsin, the defendants' electors there should meet and cast votes on December 14th, the date the ECA required appointed electors to vote, to preserve the alternative of the defendants' Wisconsin elector slate in the event the defendant ultimately prevailed in the state. B. The December 6th Memorandum, Fraudulent Elector Memo, marked a sharp departure from co-conspirator 5's Wisconsin memo, advocating that the alternate electors originally conceived of to preserve rights in Wisconsin instead be used in a number of states as fraudulent electors to prevent Biden from receiving the 270 electoral votes necessary to secure the presidency on January 6th. The fraudulent elector memo suggested that the defendants' electors in 6 purportedly contested states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, should meet and mimic as best as possible the actions of the legitimate Biden electors, and that on January 6th, the vice president should open and count the fraudulent votes, setting up a fake controversy that would derail the proper certification of Biden as president-elect. C. The December 9 Memorandum, Fraudulent Elector Instructions, consisted of co-conspirator 5's instructions on how fraudulent electors could mimic legitimate electors in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Co-conspirator 5 noted that in some states, it would be virtually impossible for the fraudulent electors to successfully take the same steps as the legitimate electors because state law required formal participation in the process by state officials or access to official resources.
Co-conspirator 5's instructions on how fraudulent electors could mimic legitimate electors came with wigs, fake mustaches, and for the Wisconsin fake electors, Brett Favre jerseys.
The plan began in early December, and ultimately the conspirators and the defendants' campaign took the Wisconsin memo and expanded it to any state that the defendant claimed was contested, even New Mexico, which the defendant had lost by more than 10% of the popular vote. This expansion was forecast by emails the defendant's chief of staff sent on December 6th, forwarding the Wisconsin memo to campaign staff and writing, "We just need to have someone coordinating the electors for states."
We just need to have someone coordinating electors for the states is government speak for a cutout.
It was at this point they were trying to get the right number of voters?
On December 6th, the defendant and co-conspirator 2 called the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee to ensure that the plan was in motion. During the call, co-conspirator 2 told the chairwoman that it was important for the RNC to help the defendant's campaign gather electors in targeted states, and falsely represented to her that such electors' votes would be used only if ongoing litigation in one of the states changed the results in the defendant's favor. After the RNC chairwoman consulted the campaign and heard that work on gathering electors was underway, she called and reported this information to the defendant, who responded approvingly.
Eastman's lie to the chairwoman was a smaller lie inside the smaller lie inside the big lie. Trump's version of the Russian nesting doll. PolitiPod set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023 with your host Matt Nisenoff will return after this brief message.
PolitiPod contributor Rhonda Handsome is an award-winning director and comedian. Catch her Monday nights on Sirius XM channel 127 when she joins John Fugelsang's Tell Me Everything, #Handsome Monday.
And now back to PolitiPod's Set Up to Be Let Down Indictment Watch 2023 with your host, Matt Nisenoff.
On December 7th, co-conspirator 1 received the Wisconsin memo and the fraudulent elector memo. Co-conspirator 1 spoke with co-conspirator 6 regarding attorneys who could assist in the fraudulent elector effort in the targeted states, and he received from co-conspirator 6 an email identifying attorneys in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin.
It's like attorney shopping at a strip mall, a mall stripped of all ethics.
The next day, on December 8th, co-conspirator 5 called the Arizona attorney on co-conspirator 6's list. In an email after the call, the Arizona attorney recounted his conversation with co-conspirator 5 as follows. I just talked to the gentleman who did that memo, co-conspirator 5. His idea is basically that all of us, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, Pennsylvania, etc., have our electors send in their votes, even though the votes aren't legal under federal law because they're not signed by the governor, so that members of Congress can fight about whether they should be counted on January 6th. They could potentially argue that they're not bound by federal law because they're Congress and make the law, etc. Kind of wild and creative. I'm happy to discuss this. My comment to him was that I guess there's no harm in it, legally at least, i.e., we would just be sending in fake electoral votes to Pence so that someone in Congress can make an objection when they start counting votes and start arguing that the fake votes should be counted.
The word fake will eventually be replaced with alternate and then replaced with Trump, who we know is a fake, the circle of lie.
Republicans want to run elections like they run the government.
In the hole. Into the ground, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
At co-conspirator 1's direction, on December 10th, co-conspirator 5 sent to points of contact in all targeted states except Wisconsin, which had already received his memos, and New Mexico, a streamlined version of the Wisconsin memo, which did not reveal the intended fraudulent use of the defendant's electors, and the fraudulent elector instructions, along with fraudulent elector certificates that he had drafted.
This plan has so many people involved, it looks like an Amway fraud pyramid without the cleaning products. And boy, does it need cleaning.
The next day, on December 11th, through co-conspirator 5, co-conspirator 1 suggested that the Arizona lawyer file a petition for certiorari in the Supreme Court as a pretext to claim that litigation was pending in the state to provide cover for the convening and voting of the defendant's fraudulent electors there. Co-conspirator 5 explained that co-conspirator 1 had heard from a state official and state provisional elector that it could appear treasonous for the Arizona electors to vote on Monday if there's no pending court proceeding.
Had the petition been for a, to quote Trump, united certiorari, maybe it wouldn't appear so treasonous.
To manage the plan in Pennsylvania, on December 12th, co-conspirator 1, co-conspirator 5, and co-conspirator 6 participated in a conference call organized by the defendant's campaign with the defendant's electors in that state. When the defendant's electors expressed concern about signing certificates representing themselves as legitimate electors, co-conspirator 1 falsely assured them that their certificates would be used only if the defendant succeeded in litigation. Subsequently, co-conspirator 6 circulated proposed conditional language to that effect for potential inclusion in the fraudulent elector certificates. A campaign official cautioned not to offer the conditional language to other states because the other states are signing what he prepared. If it gets out we change the language for PA, it could snowball. In some cases, the defendants' electors refused to participate in the plan.
On the one hand, use the conditional language, but on the other hand, keep a secret.
Some electors elected common sense and refused.
On December 13th, co-conspirator 5 sent co-conspirator 1 an email memorandum that further confirmed that the conspirators' plan was not to use the fraudulent electors only in the circumstance that the defendant's litigation was successful in one of the targeted states. Instead, the plan was to falsely present the fraudulent slates as an alternative to the legitimate slates at Congress's certification proceeding.
When the liars have to lie to the liars about the lies they're lying about, well, there lies the problem.
They really ought to have come up with a better name than fraudulent slate.
On December 13th, the defendant asked the senior campaign advisor for an update on what was going on with the elector plan and directed him to put out a statement on electors. As a result, co-conspirator 1 directed the senior campaign advisor to join a conference call with him, co-conspirator 6, and others. When the senior campaign advisor related these developments in text message to the deputy campaign manager, a senior advisor to the defendant, and a campaign staffer, the deputy campaign manager responded, "Here's the thing, the way this has morphed. It's a crazy play, so I don't know who wants to put their name on it." The senior advisor wrote, "certifying illegal votes." In turn, the participants in the group text message refused to have a statement regarding electors attributed to their names because none of them could stand by it.
As Tammy Wynot would say, stand by your scam.
The one staffer considered it, the one identified as Deputy Idiot Traitor. His offer was refused.
Also on December 13th, at a campaign staffer's request, co-conspirator 5 drafted and sent fraudulent elector certificates for the defendants' electors in New Mexico, which had not previously been among the targeted states and where there was no pending litigation on the defendants' behalf. The next day, the defendants' campaign filed an election challenge suit in New Mexico at 11:54 a.m., 6 minutes before the noon deadline for the electors' votes, as a pretext, so there was pending litigation there at the time the fraudulent electors voted.
In football jargon, this would be a Hail Nary a chance in hell pass.
It would have been filed earlier, but that Filet-O-Fish isn't getting itself, you know.
On December 14th, the legitimate electors of all 50 states and the District of Columbia met in their respective jurisdictions to formally cast their votes for president, resulting in a total of 232 electoral votes for the defendant and 306 for Biden. The legitimate electoral votes that Biden won in the states that the defendant targeted and the defendant's margin of defeat were as follows: Arizona, 11 electoral votes, 10,457 votes. Georgia, 16 electoral votes, 11,779 votes. Michigan, 16 electoral votes, 154,188 votes. Nevada, 6 electoral votes, 33,596 votes. New Mexico, 5 electoral votes, 99,720 votes. Pennsylvania, 20 electoral votes, 80,555 votes, and Wisconsin, 10 electoral votes, 20,682 votes.
For those keeping score at home, that's 84 electoral votes for Biden to one big lie for Trump.
A campaign advisor toyed with the idea of a federal law declaring that 232 is more than 306 on specific Tuesdays.
On the same day, at the direction of the defendant and co-conspirator 1, fraudulent electors convened sham proceedings in the 7 targeted states to cast fraudulent electoral ballots in favor of the defendant. In some states, in order to satisfy legal requirements set forth for legitimate electors under state law, state officials were enlisted to provide the fraudulent electors access to state capitol buildings so they could gather and vote there. In many cases, however, as co-conspirator 5 had predicted in the fraudulent elector instructions, the fraudulent electors were unable to satisfy the legal requirements.
But not meeting legal requirements is precisely why Trump hired these particular attorneys.
Nonetheless, as directed in the fraudulent electors' instructions, shortly after the fraudulent electors met on December 14th, the targeted states' fraudulent elector certificates were mailed to the President of the Senate, the Archivist of the United States, and others. The defendant and co-conspirators ultimately used the certificates of these fraudulent electors to deceitfully target the government function, and did so contrary to how fraudulent electors were told they would be used.
Isn't using the Postal Service to send fake elector certificates to Mike Pence and the U.S. Archives a federal crime? Just wait until DeJoy hears about this. He's going to remove even more mail sorting machines.
Trump employees even lied to the fraudulent electors. Is there no honor among frauds anymore? To be fair, they had said they liked the vodka.
Unlike those of the fraudulent electors, consistent with ECA, the legitimate electors' signed certificates were annexed to the state executive's certificate of ascertainment before being sent to the President of the Senate and others.
I am so used to the word annexed being preceded by Russia and being followed by parts of that I peed a little.
Forwarded
That
to
evening,
the defendant at 6:26 p.m. Executive assistant, the RNC chairwoman,
forwarded
to the defendant
Electors Recap
through his executive
Final,
assistant, which
an
represented
email
that in
titled
6
Electors
contested
Recap
states,
Final,
Arizona, Georgia, Michigan,
which
Nevada,
represented
Pennsylvania,
that
and
in
Wisconsin,
6
contested states,
the defendant's
Arizona,
electors had
Georgia,
voted
Michigan,
in
Nevada,
parallel to
Pennsylvania,
Biden's
and
electors.
Wisconsin. The defendant's electors had voted in parallel to Biden's electors.
It's in front of him.
The defendant's executive assistant
The defendant's
responded,
attempt to
"It's
leverage
in
the
front of
Justice
him."
Department.
He doesn't understand it, but it's in front of him. Is there another version with illustrations?
Ironically, so is 20 years in jail.
That was great.
The defendant's attempt to leverage the Justice Department to use deceit to get state officials to replace legitimate electors and electoral votes with the defendants. In late December 2020, the defendant attempted to use the Justice Department to make knowingly false claims of election fraud to officials in the targeted states through a formal letter under the acting attorney general's signature, thus giving the defendant's lies the backing of the federal government and attempting to improperly influence the targeted states to replace legitimate Biden electors with the defendants.
But don't worry, Jim Jordan is investigating this weaponization of the Department of Justice as we speak, right? Oh, never mind.
You've heard of an iron fist in a velvet glove? This approach is more like a tiny fist in a garbage bag, like a Trojan horse, but instead of soldiers, it's stuffed with hog manure and asbestos.
On December 22nd, the defendant met with co-conspirator number 4 at the White House. Co-conspirator 4 had not informed his leadership at the Justice Department of the meeting, which was a violation of the Justice Department's written policy restricting contacts with the White House to guard against improper political influence.
But that horse has been out of the barn so long, its grand colts have built their own barns to escape from.
What's a little improper political influence when you're part of an attempted anti-democratic coup?
On December 26th, co-conspirator 4 spoke on the phone with the acting attorney general and lied about the circumstances of his meeting with the defendant at the White House, falsely claiming that the meeting had been unplanned. The acting attorney general directed co-conspirator 4 not to have authorized contacts with the White House again, and co-conspirator 4 said he would not.
It's only fitting that on Boxing Day, co-conspirator 4, Jeffrey Clark, was boxed into another lie.
And for co-conspirator 4, his word is his con.
The next morning, on December 27th, contrary to the acting attorney general's direction, co-conspirator 4 spoke with the defendant on the defendant's cell phone for nearly 3 minutes.
Not long enough to boil an egg, but just long enough to cook one's goose.
They still hadn't gotten a decent phone plan.
That afternoon, the defendant called the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general and said, among other things, "People tell me co-conspirator 4 is great. I should put him in." The defendant also raised multiple false claims of election fraud, which the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general refuted. When the acting attorney general told the defendant that the Justice Department could not and would not change the outcome of the election, the defendant responded, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman."
In other words, just say the lie and the Republican Congress will prove the lie.
Anti-democracy is best when shared with friends.
We have a new motivational poster. Teamwork. It makes the scheme work.
On December 28th, co-conspirator 4 sent a draft letter to the acting attorney general and acting deputy attorney general, which he proposed they all sign. The draft was addressed to state officials in Georgia, and co-conspirator 4 proposed sending versions of the letter to elected officials in other targeted states. The proposed letter contained numerous knowingly false claims about the election and the Justice Department, including that A, the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states.
Trump also induced the Department of Justice to declare him to be a stable genius, well over 6 feet tall, and not fat at all. Maybe a little underweight, actually, if you want to know the truth.
Yeah.
B, the Justice Department believed that in Georgia and other states, 2 valid slates of electors had gathered at the proper location on December 14th, and that both sets of ballots had been transmitted to Congress. That is, co-conspirator 4's letter sought to advance the defendant's fraudulent elector plan by using the authority of the Justice Department to falsely present the fraudulent electors as a valid alternative to the legitimate electors. The Justice Department urged that the state legislature convene a special legislative session to create the opportunity to, among other things, choose the fraudulent electors over the legitimate electors.
While a draft letter appears to have a stronger body than a bottled letter, the draft letter loses its flavor more quickly once served.
This has been PolitiPod's setup to be let down Indictment Watch 2023. The DC Indictment. American Continued Carnage. The I Alone Can Fix It edition. Thank you for having joined PolitiPod entities Erika Klemmt-Ginsberg, GD Fenderson, Tom Bickle, and Matt Nisenoff. Until next indictment, and we're planning on that being next week.
Breaking news, Georgia just in. This just in from Georgia.
Georgia with the steel chair.
We'll still have the same clothes on for the next edition.
Thank you for joining us for PolitiPod, set up to be let down Indictment Watch 2023, DC Indictment. Please join us for more of our indictment coverage. And when you come back, bring a friend. Dun, 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 dun. Oh shit! I forgot to hit record, guys.
One more time.